Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you here today. My name is Samantha Trad, and I will be moderating today's webinar, Tax Prep Essentials for Nonprofits. At Smith, Marian and Company, we are proud to be trusted experts in serving nonprofits and public housing authorities. With over 40 years of experience, we understand the complex financial and operational challenges these organizations face, and we're here to help you navigate them with confidence. Whether you need support with compliance, auditing, financial reporting, or strategic consulting, our team brings deep expertise and a genuine passion for your mission. We don't just provide services, we become a partner you can count on. We're dedicated to helping nonprofits and housing authorities thrive because we believe in the work you do and the communities you serve. We are very excited to bring you this webinar today. We hope it helps your organization grow and thrive. We hope that something in the series sparks an action item that improves your organization. There's a lot we can't control right now, but there's a lot that we can. Next slide. A few housekeeping items. Today's webinar, along with the slides and tools we'll be sharing with you today, will be emailed to you after the webinar. This is an interactive webinar, and we would love for you to participate through the chat box. Thank you to everyone who's introduced themselves in the chat box. Please ask questions. There are no stupid questions. If you're afraid, you can always ask a question anonymously, but please, taxes can be very confusing, and we are here to help with that. So please ask questions in the question box. After each person presents, there will be a short time where they will answer questions, and then at the very end, we'll have more time for your questions. Lastly, let us know if you need any technical help through the chat. Let's get started. Today's objectives. By the end of this webinar, you will be able to tell your organization's story through your 990, demonstrate your organization's mission and vision clearly in filings and communications, and gain practical tools you can personalize. I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Carlos Carazo, who many of you may know, has been with Smith Marian since 2015 and became a principal at the beginning of 2025. He specializes in serving nonprofits and corporations with tax planning, compliance, and financial consulting, and is licensed both as a CPA and enrolled agent. Known for his approachable style and ability to represent clients before the IRS, Carlos builds strong, lasting relationships while helping organizations navigate complex financial challenges. Outside of work, he serves as president of his HOA and enjoys creating memorable experiences with his family, especially trips to Disneyland. Welcome, Carlos.
Everybody. So we're here for Tax Prep Essentials. So first off, what is a 990? The simplest way I can put this is it's a tax return. It's oversimplifying it, of course, but if you're a 501c anything, 1 through, what is it, 26 now, you have to file it. You typically have to file a tax return, which is your annual compliance requirement with the IRS. They're just like in everything in the tax world. There are a few exceptions, but 99% of our nonprofit entities will have to do some sort of annual tax return. Beyond the federal requirement, there are also state requirements. Almost every single state has some sort of annual filing requirement, whether it's a full-on tax return or just some sort of other state-only filing, like through the Secretary of State or something like that. Now you have to file this every year. If you don't file this for 3 years in a row, you are up for auto revocation with the federal agency, the IRS. State agencies have their own requirements that are like kind to this. But you don't want to do this because if you get auto revoked, you lose your nonprofit status, and then they assess taxes for all of the years where you are not a nonprofit because you're still some sort of taxable entity at that point. If that ever happens, you'll want to get reinstated. Smith Marian can help with that if that ever happens. So just putting that out, basic info on what you have to do on a year-to-year basis. You got to file this 990. There's 4 main types. That's not the only way that these types are determined. The easiest way is to just base it around support, which is the amount of money you bring in a year. But again, it's tax, it's complicated. There's a lot more factors than just support, but these are the easiest ones. So if you have less than $50,000 of support annually, you can file the postcard, the 990N. If your level of support is between 50,000 and 200,000, and you have less than $500,000 of assets, you can file a 990EZ, which is about a 4-page return, not too bad. And then if you're above 200,000 or above $500,000 of assets, or your option also, you can file the 990. You can optionally just file the long return. 12 pages, lots of schedules, but it helps when applying for grants and applying to donors' eyes. There's a lot of disclosure you have to put in there, and they really appreciate seeing that. The last type down there, the PF, that's only for 501c3 private foundations. If that's you, you have to file it. Another thing you might want to keep in mind is maybe you shouldn't be a PF. You can always talk to a tax professional, someone like myself, to see if you can stop filing a PF if you don't need to. Right. So when it comes to preparing the 990, if you are working with a tax accountant, most of what you're doing is interacting with the request list. So again, if you do hire someone to do this for you, this is the main thing that you'll be handling. So your request list is numerous things that you'll be giving to your accountant year after year to complete the 990. The note says they don't change much every year. As per normal, your business may not change much year to year. It may grow in size, but not necessarily, uh, add new support revenues or anything like that. So a lot of the time, this is going to stay the same. And there are 3 items that you will have every single year. So there's going to be financials. Now, if you have a financial statement audit, that will already fulfill the financials. But if you don't, you'll have to supply financials to your tax preparer. Those are going to be things like a balance sheet, an income statement, or the nomenclature would be statement of financial position, statement of activity, and then statement of functional expense. So those are the 3 things that are in the financials that you'll have to supply every year if you're not an audited entity. The next thing you'll need for number 2 is the board list. You're going to have to supply that every year. It may not change every year, but we're going to ask for it every single year. And the third thing at a minimum is going to be is who is signing the return. So if you file a 990EZ or a 990, those are the 3 things at a minimum you will need. There are way more items than that you'll be requested for, as you've probably encountered with the request list we've provided you. But we've included in the handouts the full list. I believe there's something like 15 or 17 items on there. No current client that we have has all of them, nor will they ever. Just different types of nonprofits have different types of requests. But yeah, those are the things you'll need. Also, if you don't have a tax preparer and you want to file the return on your own, those are the things you'll need to do it on your own as well. Those are the main things, but you may not know which things you do or do not have. So it's always good to consult a tax professional for help on that. All right. When preparing our return, we want to get some things into the 990 to tell the world more about our entity. So we're going to talk about core programs and impact, and then also the community and beneficiaries or the recipients of the services we provide. All right, so first up for core programs. So on the 990 and the 990EZ, we can include typically 1 to 3 big things that we accomplish annually. These things want to be tied to the mission of the entity, should follow everything that the entity stands for. If they were to Google your entity, the stuff that's on your return should jive very well with what's on your About Me section or About Us section for the entity. Now, there isn't a lot of space typically allocated on the face of the 990 for this disclosure, but all the extra parts will spill over onto Schedule O. So we have some examples of the pages that we can show you for that. So this is the top half of page 2 of the 990. The 990EZ has a very similar sized section for this. So we're working with the same amount of space. So up there on line 1, we have the mission, which will just reiterate the mission of the entity, which also comes from page 1 of the 990. But down on 4A is where we start talking about our accomplishments. So whatever your accomplishments are, we'll have 4A, and then we'll show on the next page, we also have a space for a 4B and a 4C. There isn't a lot of space here again, but everything that spills over here is going to spill over onto Schedule O. So you don't have to be shy about running out of space. seasoned readers of the 990 know how to look for Schedule O. It's typically the second to last schedule in any tax return, and they know where to find this data. So we'll say all different kinds of things about what we've done, and then the expenses allocated to these programs, any grants handed out, and then any program revenue that we have that comes in from them. Also on line 4D, we have space for extra programs. So we do have some clients that run 7 programs. So that'll all go smashed into 4D at the bottom and again, spill over onto Schedule O. So what do we put here? We put as much as we can. Now that doesn't mean you put like 10 pages per program. People don't want to spend, 7 hours reading your tax return, but we want to put as much stuff as we can on a year-to-year basis in these pockets. So we want to and we also want to update these numbers annually. So if we're doing a 2024 return, we want to talk about the numbers that we achieved in 2024. And in some cases, it's also beneficial to put aggregate numbers for the lifetime of the entity. Be short point, like we've served 12 million people in the last 50 years, but just nice and short for the aggregate amount. But we want to go into detail for the annual amount. And we want to talk about who served, what services are provided, and we want to list metrics in those fields. So some examples of things you can put in there, if you're doing direct services, as in you're providing, assisted living to people, you want to put how many people you're helping house, whether it's through a voucher program or through rent assistance. If you're providing after school tutoring, you want to say how many students are getting affected by that and how many school districts you're helping. If you're doing meals, such as a Meals on Wheels, you want to talk about how many meals you provide, potentially monthly even, just to really put the case out there. If you're doing other fields like education and outreach, you can talk about how many classes or workshops you put on. So for instance, we have a art nonprofit up in the mountains, and they like to put on how many workshops they put on both for regular adults and adults with disabilities. Gives them good outreach in the mountain community. Um, Another section, if you're doing community and economic impact, we have a nonprofit that works with a couple schools out in Tennessee in the various counties out there where they help people get after job placement. We put how much money they put into these schools and how many students are being assisted by these programs. We just fill it with how much data we possibly can. If you have a big volunteer outreach, we want to talk about how many people have volunteered and how many hours they're providing and what they're providing hours towards. Another easy one, scholarships. If we're helping students go to college, we should talk about the dollar value, the dollar average per scholarship, and how many people are receiving these scholarships. If you're in the low income housing sector, I do know from a lot of our clients that are in that sector, they don't put a lot of details, but we need to start putting those details in there to help further get grant assistance, because we need to put more than low income housing in the county of so and so. We can say how many doors are served, how many people are served, and how many people graduate out of programs like that. Uh-oh, the lights. Oh no. um, Another category is animal services. If you're in the field of working with animals, spay and neuter, education training, things like that, medical services provided, adoptions. We want to put how many of those we did in our program service accomplishment. And the other way to think about this is if your company has a brochure. So I put down there an annual brochure report because some companies do. Some of our entities have this that they hand out to play at like fundraising events. Those are the same kind of details we want to put on your tax return, because people can go look up your tax return anytime and boom, it's there. It's stated over and over again, and everything agrees. Also, if there's any success stories, like personal success stories that I know some of our entities have and they like to put on their website, we should put a small blurb about that also in our accomplishments. Um, so community and beneficiaries. So we have our stats, we have our numbers and our data, but we have to tie that into who we're helping and how we're helping them. So the first thing we talk about is who. So are we helping people, animals, ideas, institutions, multiple, something else? Typically, it's one of these. Typically, it's people. But the more of these that we can tie into, the better. So Animal services helps both people and animals. We're helping animals find hope and we're helping people get happy. Institutions, I mentioned that nonprofit in Tennessee that works with schools getting job placements. Not only are we helping people get jobs and get out of high school and work towards a better life, we're helping the institutions, the public school system, um, generate more success for themselves and just help the school work better as well. So we have the hard data and we have to tie it to the community to show that the money that is donated to our entity is making as much of an impact as possible. And lastly, for community and beneficiaries, we have to think about what level, Hannah. Um, so are we servicing a neighborhood? Are we servicing a city, a county, or a state? Now, for our really small entities, which are a 990N, which is the less than 50,000 of support, we're typically servicing a neighborhood, and that's fine. But as we graduate up and the support grows, we're going to need to show more and more how the dollars donated to this entity are impacting the surrounding community. So as you graduate from a 990N to a 990EZ, now you're more likely supporting a city. And then as you graduate from a 990EZ to a 990, you're more likely supporting a county or counties. Once you get big enough, you can support a whole state or multi-state or in some instances, international. But we like to, these are the different levels that you'll be at. And then like a simple story that I have from one of our own clients that's helped me out personally, Humane Society of San Bernardino Valley, the last dog I was able to adopt from the shelter here in the county, I went there and I was able to get my spay and neuter service, incredibly affordably. And I, strange, small world, I end up doing their tax return and I get to see all of their activities about what they do between the education, the medical treatments, the different medical services they provide. And we put all of that data on the return to show how they impact both the city and the county and even parts of Riverside County as well, even though they're from San Bernardino County. So we put all that kind of data in there to show the impact that they have, to show that this is all worth it. So that's how we can take our programs and just take an annual compliance requirement, which is the tax return, and put a good foot out there to show that, we are a good nonprofit that is worth your time and energy, whether it's through dollars or volunteer hours. Any questions?
Thank you, Carlos. I do have two questions, but first, I just want to say this. I personally find this so helpful because I have never thought of filing taxes as being able to tell your story. You might even makes it seem much easier, I think, in a way when you realize it's really an opportunity to kind of align what you're doing and tell your story. Well,
I did forget to mention one thing.
yeah.
There is always one question from the request list we send clients that gets a lot of, I don't know if I'd say pushback, but they're always like, why do we do this? We ask for an updated copy of your program accomplishments. This is why. We will always copy last year's program accomplishments and say, here were last year's numbers. Let's update this year's numbers. Or in the case of clients that don't have last year's numbers, we're going to start sending out lists that say, hey, we should add data about these things to add to your tax return.
That is very helpful to know. So you're not just being pesky. It's actually very useful and helpful because you can help tell the story for your clients. I love
Yes.
it. Okay, one of the questions is what if it's difficult to quantify the number of people you have served? How do you figure out what that number is? Should you just guess?
Yeah, well, we can start with a guesstimate the first year. We always say to be more conservative, so we would round down. If we think we serve 1,000, maybe we start saying we serve 600 people, and then we start building things in place to start counting them. Now, I'm just the tax accountant, so obviously I'm not in your office doing these things, but by having the conversation, and I can give you ideas on how to start counting these things. And we can also put notes into the accounting software if available. If you, for instance, if you have a volunteer journal entry you have to plug for your, not plug, but journalize for your audit, we can make notes saying, well, we had like 1,100 hours. Okay, if we say the average person does 6 hours, we can say that's X number of people. So like little things like that. But yeah, it usually has to start with a guesstimate if we're not entirely sure, and then we can build things to track those counts.
How directly do you need to be helping the people in order to count them? Because I think probably some organizations, like let's say, for example, you give advice about healthcare. Well, that's going to help the person plus their family. Do you count the ripple effect, or do you really just count like the individuals that you gave food to and not the ripple effect, if that makes sense?
So if they don't have the ability to know whether it's going to a person or a family at first, we just count the person. But I do know entities have, sheets that say like, is this for a family or a person? And then we just count the average family as whatever the average family is. I believe it's like 4.2 or something right now. And we just use that as our multiplier factor.
So can you have numbers like we helped 102.3 people?
Well, no, we'll round that. We'll just round
I
it
know,
to
I'm just
100.
teasing. Okay, last question, and feel free if there are more questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Um, you covered a lot. What parts of filings can Smith, Marion, and Company help our org with?
All parts. So we do the prep and the review, and then uh, we do the whole thing. So we can also help with accounting if that's a need as well. But if you can supply us with the basics for the tax prep, we can do the rest of the work, and then we issue a draft. It goes to review on the entity side, and then after it's been approved by their board, we can assemble and file the return. Um, but short of doing the financials without being engaged for accounting, we can literally do the rest of the return just through inquiry.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate it. If you
Mhm.
think of more questions throughout the webinar, oh, it looks like we just got one more. How do you help updating a nonprofit story?
Um, that's a little bit outside of the scope of tax prep, but we can certainly assist with that. We would probably want to do an interview with team members of management and then some staff members to see what it is the entity does versus what they say they do. And then we can update the story from there. But yeah, that's a toughie.
Well, and
Oh, I think Hannah has something.
I was going to say, I bet Hannah can help.
Yeah, so that's 100% something that we can help with. We can set up sessions to sit down and talk and brainstorm and work on setting your vision, tying it into your story, coming up with success stories. That's 100% something we can walk you through and do like a couple hour to a day session, depending on scope. So that's definitely something that we can assist with.
Mm.
And then I did see there's a question in the chat as well.
The symphony gives concert tickets to local students. Should that be noted by number of tickets or just dollar value? Great question, Deborah.
So that one should be number of tickets. The dollar value isn't as impactful on the return because we're not going to quantify that technically as much of anything, but we can say like in one of your programs, we support, local outreach by, providing students tickets to concerts, something like that.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos. If you have more questions, Carlos will be sticking around and can answer more questions at the end of the webinar. So feel free to just keep popping your questions in. Next up, we have Hannah Baldwin. She is a director at Smith, Marion and Co. She advises nonprofits and housing authorities on strategic planning, leadership development, and operational improvement. Her work includes facilitating retreats, implementing balanced scorecards, and coaching leadership teams. She brings a proven track record of helping mission-driven organizations achieve clarity and results. Hannah, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Sam. Hello, everybody. I'm super excited to join you today, and I get to talk about mission and vision, which is something that I love to talk about. So, when you think about your mission and your vision as a nonprofit, that is really your foundation. So, that's your starting point. That's going to be your foundation. And that's what everything should revolve around, from your branding, from your website to your 990. So every single thing you do should come back to that mission and vision. Think about it as your organization's compass. Your mission should clearly and concisely explain who you serve, what you do, and why it matters. For a lot of nonprofits, what ends up happening is your mission statement was set a very long time ago, and it's something that's very lengthy, and a lot of people don't actually know what is inside of it. So a lot of you actually need to take a second look at and possibly revamp your mission statement. Your vision looks farther ahead into the future, and it paints the picture of where you're going and how you plan on getting there. It shows the change that you hope to see in the world. So pairing together your mission and your vision helps give direction not only to your strategic plan, but to your board and your staff and your stakeholders as to what it is that you're doing. And it helps people understand why is it that you do what you do and what is it that you're doing. So when we're thinking of our mission and our vision, we want to be sure that your mission statement is clear and concise. You don't want it to be too lengthy, too wordy, or too confusing. And you do want to work with volunteers, the board, and your staff to help make sure they understand what is it that you're doing. You want to be sure that you have a clear, consistent message that's going out into the community, and that when somebody speaks to one of your board members or one of your volunteers or one of your staff members, that they're receiving a similar message. And if you don't think strategically about how to cultivate that message and how to coach people in giving that message, you're going to get a variety of things when somebody asks about your organization. So this is really a strategic opportunity for you to help work on crafting what is that message that we want to send out. Something that I recommend is take a look at your mission, either at your next board retreat or your next strategic planning, and ask, does this align with our current objectives? Is this still relevant to who we are today and who we serve today? Is there anything that needs to be updated? And I recommend that you do this every 1 year to every 3 years. And don't skip it if you think nothing needs to be updated, because you'd be surprised how often, if you sit down and you look, so many people have misalignment between what is the mission actually saying. And it gives an opportunity for stakeholders to ask, hey, what are we trying to say here? What do we mean by this? And get clarity. This doesn't have to be long. You can spend 30 minutes on this session and then dive a little bit deeper if you decide something truly needs to be updated. So it doesn't need to be daunting at all. We have a handout for you that we emailed out that you can reference and is very, very helpful. And then the vision is going to describe the long-term change you want to see in your community or in the world. When you're doing a strategic plan, you're going to be setting your 10-year vision, and then everything trickles down from that. So every single thing should funnel back into meeting your 10-year vision. So your 1-year goals, your quarterly goals, your 3-year plan, everything should tie into that vision. So you're constantly moving towards something rather than putting out fires. These statements are not meant to be static. You want to be sure that you're looking at them together, making sure they're pairing well together, and that you're evaluating them regularly. So once you have an up-to-date mission and vision, the next step is making sure that it's consistent with your public image and your brand. So your public image, your story. So your story and your public image creates brand and public trust. So everything from your social media to your newsletters, to your email marketing, to the materials that you're putting out, to your 990 should all cohesively tie back together to tell the same story. They should be one cohesive brand. When you're telling your story, go beyond the numbers. The numbers are really important. You do want to give data like, we fed X number of homeless people. We housed this many people. We provided this many classes. But if you don't tie it back to a story, you're missing a core opportunity to bring in the human side of things. So make sure you're pairing both data and story together. This would be a good chance to set up a session where you sit down and you go, what are the 3 stories that we want to tell? And you can brainstorm and think about who are the people that we want to really focus in on, and what are the stories that we want to be repeated over and over again. And then how can we make sure that we equip our staff, our volunteers, and our stakeholders to take that message out into the community and be retelling that same exact story? Because people connect with stories about what you're doing. It's very easy to give some numbers out, but if you don't tie it back to a key person, you're missing an opportunity. I've even seen where people have done short little videos, and those are very, very powerful. When you throw those up on your website, on a YouTube channel, You don't need to invest a lot of money in this. I mean, honestly, something as simple as taking an iPhone or taking, a video recorder and recording a video and getting a good story. It can be 2 minutes long. It doesn't need to be lengthy. Again, this doesn't have to be high production if you have a good story and you can put it up and use it again and again. So narrative consistency is key. So as you're looking at the story you're telling, as you're looking at your narrative, ask yourself, does this align with the website? Does this align with our newsletters and our email, our social media, and our fundraising materials? Your 990 should really tie back into every other message that you're sending out. If you're not doing this, you're missing a core opportunity, because remember that your donors and your prospective donors are going to be looking at that 990. They might not even go to your website, but they will be looking at that 990. So be sure that everything is cohesive. Or if they're looking in multiple places, you want to be sure there's not a disconnect and they're not going, oh, you know what? I'm seeing this on the website and social media, but the 990 is super outdated. And so this information isn't relevant anymore. What's going on? You want to use this as a chance to build public trust and build your brand image. And then why does this matter? So I was working with a client and they felt this very strong pressure to assist members of their community with an after-school program. And it was something that constantly was getting brought up in their strategic plan. And they're constantly going, how can we dedicate resources to this? And it became something that was becoming very, very overwhelming and stressful. And the team looked at their vision, they looked at their mission, and they went, this doesn't align with the work that we do. And while this is a really fantastic cause, it ultimately doesn't tie back into our brand. It doesn't tie back into our mission, and it doesn't tie back into who we serve. And so they were actually able to let go of this and go, let's take our resources and let's put them back into the main objective of what our organization is aiming to do. And when they did that, they felt a huge sigh of relief, because I always tell nonprofits and housing authorities, you can't do everything. You have a mission, you know who you serve, you know what that mission is, and it's easy for other people to put pressure on you to do a little bit for everybody. But that's why we have great nonprofits in the area that are able to jump in and partner with you. So don't let other people's vision drag you away from the true vision of your organization. That's why it matters. That's why it's important that you do strategic planning, that you look at your mission statement, that you look at your vision, that you figure out what your story is. So if this is anything that you feel like you need assistance with, don't worry, we can help you out. We're able to come alongside you and help make this as easy as possible for you. So it's not another daunting task. It's something that you're able to get done and knock out, and you'll work hard, but you'll get it done in a short amount of time as opposed to having it drag out for a long period. If you're hearing this and you're going, wow, like I don't know if my brand is aligned. I don't know what my story is. I don't know where to go. Don't worry. We can help you out. So credibility and compliance are key. Tying that consistent messaging together helps create credibility to you, and it helps give people something to really resonate with and attach to. You want to be a nonprofit where when people think about you, they go, I know what they do. You want them to be able to go like, man, like I know who they serve. I know what they do. And when you're doing your galas or you're sending out your newsletters, you want to utilize those opportunities to showcase the great work that you're doing through those stories. Connection to the 990. So vision, mission, and story, they're not just marketing, they appear on the 990. So before it comes time to get together with your tax preparer and start sending them over the information, think about, hey, what is it that we should be prepping? What is it that we should be sending over? Somebody asked a little bit earlier, when it comes to the numbers, if you don't have those figures, what can you do? Something that I recommend is put together a data scorecard. Sit down and come up with maybe 5 core numbers that you want to track, whether it be number of people served, number of volunteers engaged, whatever it might be. Come up with your 5 core numbers and make sure they're trackable So make sure it's not going to be too difficult to track them. And then also come up with goals for those. What do we want to see per month, per quarter, per year, and track those on a regular basis. And it'll accomplish two things. One, it's going to create alignment with your leadership team around core set of data that you're trying to reach and metrics that you're aiming towards. It's going to give your team something to shoot for. And you're not going to meet goals that you're not tracking. So by setting those goals, it's going to help you meet those goals. And then the other thing is when it comes time to report to your tax preparer, those data figures, you've already done the heavy lifting. So you've actually already done the work of putting in the time for that scorecard. And now you're not sitting down going, oh, what should I turn in? You already have a scorecard in place. It's ready to go. That's something that, again, if you don't have one already, we can sit down, we can work with your team, and we can help you come up with what should be on your scorecard. So core takeaways, make sure you align your words and your actions, reinforce impact, and build long-term sustainability. And make sure you're setting aside time with your board and your leadership team this year to revisit your mission and vision, make sure that they're relevant, and make sure you have a 10-year target and you know where you're going. And that way it's going to drive every decision that you make.
Thank you, Hannah.
Oh.
What you just said actually goes right into the first question we have. Who should be part of evaluating mission and vision? Should you include the board, staff, and what if you're having trouble aligning everyone?
Great question. It 100% depends on the size of your organization and your board involvement. So some small organizations have a board that is heavily involved. And then other larger organizations sometimes have more of an advisory board. So it definitely is going to first depend on, first and foremost, do you have a staff or are you more working with the board? And then when it comes to setting up that team, I would say, start with about 5 people. Don't go more than 10. If you go more than 10, it's just going to be way too many people. And then if you're going, you know what, we have a larger organization, so we want to include some board member representative as well as some employees. Think about going, who's a board member who we can have attend who would have good feedback, would participate in this process, and is willing to dedicate the time to it. And then go to your staff and don't just think about who are your top employees. Think about who is innovative, who has ideas, who is willing to ask questions, who has diverse perspectives. So don't just stop with, hey, these are all our 5 top people, we'll put them in, it's done. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to take somebody who is either, maybe like 2-year team member or volunteer and pull them into a leadership opportunity. And so, think strategically about those. I would start with a list. And then as you're going through the list, if you see duplicates, okay, these 2 people do very similar thing, have very similar perspective. That's where you can kind of start to, maybe cross off one person here and then put in another person over there.
That's great advice. Thank you, Hannah. Can you give us an example of a scorecard?
Yes, I can send one as an example. But typically with a scorecard, you're going to have your set data that you're tracking, and then you'll have a set frequency. So whether it be monthly, quarterly, or annually, and then you're going to have a goal that you're aiming for. And then, so if you're tracking it monthly, then every single month you're going to report on that number. And so you're going to actually look and see, are we hitting our targets? And then I always say, if you have a scorecard, each metric that you're tracking should have a person who's accountable for that metric. So you should figure out who's really over this area and have them be held accountable for tracking that number, reporting that number, and ultimately working on making sure that number is hit.
One last question. So let's say that you realize when you're filling out your 990, there was a grant that you got that was actually outside of your mission and vision, and you wanna apply for the grant again. Should you go ahead and apply for the grant again, even though it's not really, it's a bit outside your mission and vision? And how do you make that decision?
Oh no, Carlos, do you have any thoughts on that one?
How far outside is it? So if it's adjacent, Because if you say it's outside your vision, I'm thinking like you're a nonprofit that's, supposed to help with like underprivileged people, and this is a nonprofit. This is a thing for like something in a completely different realm.
But if it's adjacent, it's more okay.
I mean, I would argue that that's more okay. Um,
I would say
it,
you
it,
really
it
have to
just
look at
depends.
the
It just
grant
depends how far
requirements.
outside we're talking.
Yeah, I would say you
Um,
definitely have to look at the grant requirements and make sure you can fill the grant requirements.
and it's also strange that you would say that because that would also make me think that the grant has compliance requirements. Whereas most of the time when you're applying for a grant, or maybe not most of the time, but you'd be applying for like core grants, that would be granting you the funds based on how your mission aligns with what they're trying to do with the funds as well. So I would make the argument if you're applying for something based off of core properties that align with you and they're not completely perfect and they grant it to you anyways as an unrestricted fund, that's much more palatable than the other, which would be, heavy compliance requirements on a field that you guys do not participate in at all. That would make me say you probably shouldn't do it because the compliance requirements are going to drive the administrative costs up far too high on that grant.
That's the financial aspect of it. But I mean, the other thing is that your mission and vision are not set in stone, right? They should evolve. They should be looked at on a regular basis. And so I think it's up to the board and management to decide, is this something that we want to continue to do? And do we really want to expand into that area with our mission and vision, or should we really concentrate on the things that we do best?
Thank you, Pete. Great answer. Thank you, everyone. Good question. That is a nice segue for me to introduce Pete. Pete began providing accounting services to nonprofit organizations in 1996, focusing on clients with accounting system issues and complicated grant reporting. He joined Smith Marion at the end of 2006 and became a partner in the firm in 2012. Over his 34-year accounting career, he has been involved in nearly every facet of not-for-profit accounting, including accounting system setup, outsourced CFO functions, auditing, periodic accounting, and tax preparation. In his free time, Pete races cars, rides horses, and enjoys spending time with his wife, children, and 3 grandchildren. Thank you, Pete. Oh, you're on mute, Pete.
Well, thank you for including me on this. I'm filling in for Kendra, but as you saw by my bio, I've done this for a long time, so have quite a bit of experience. And governance and accountability are near and dear to my heart because I've seen lots of bad things in those 34 years, and the biggest issues that particularly small nonprofits have is that generally the life cycle starts with somebody who has a good idea for beginning a nonprofit, and they come up with their initial mission for the organization, and then they recruit their friends and neighbors and acquaintances to be their board, uh, and that doesn't necessarily build the best um, type of board management relationship. What you end up with potentially is just a board that says yes to everything that management wants, and ultimately the board has a fiduciary responsibility because when you're dealing with a nonprofit, you're dealing with public funds, right? And all of these things are not yours to do with as you please. They are there um, to be used in the proper mission of that nonprofit, and the board is who provides that oversight. So the board shouldn't be involved in operations, but the board should be providing oversight, right? So that means that the executive director works for the board, does the things that the board comes up with on the strategic level, and that is what builds the donor and community trust, which you will need to um, get grants, and even to get clients, right? So if the clients don't trust what it is that you do, or they don't really know what it is that you do, they're also going to be reluctant to come to you. And certainly the donors are not going to be lining up to hand you grants if they don't think that the organization is governed appropriately. So by having good governance, you're going to protect the mission of the organization. Automatically, by fulfilling your fiduciary duty, you are going to be protecting the resources of the agency. So that's what this is all about. So what does board engagement look like, right? One of the biggest duties of the board is to provide or support fundraising and outreach. So your board members, should be out there promoting the agency, and they should be, if not fundraising themselves, supporting fundraising activities, whatever it is that you need to do in order to keep the doors open. I see lots of agencies that heavily rely on grant funds and do little or no fundraising. And that's a recipe for disaster because generally speaking, grants come with strings attached to them. This is what you have to provide us. This is what you have to do. And having some sort of general fund, unrestricted funds, ultimately make for a healthy nonprofit. So supporting fundraising and supporting outreach is a big part of the board. And then the next part is active participation in the strategy for the agency, right? As Hannah mentioned, looking at that mission and vision and making sure that the organization is headed in the right direction. And then you turn that over to management and say, look, now it's up to you to keep it going and and report back to us. And then the next piece of that is reviewing the financial health. So the board members should be looking at financial results. They should have a budget to compare to every year. Management is required to adhere to that budget, come back to the board if budgeted funds are being overextended, and if there needs to be a revision. And that's absolutely normal, right? It's like you're coming up with a guess at the beginning of the year and you're saying this is going to be our budget. And then things change, right? Maybe the items that you needed have gone up in price. Maybe they doubled in price. Maybe they're not available at all and you have to go to a different supplier. So that also is part of the board responsibility, is to make sure that they're there to update the budget and give the support to management to make sure that things are being done. And then asking the critical questions, right? Are we paying the right amount to our employees? Is the executive director compensation warranted? These are all things that the board should be asking on a regular basis as part of their fiduciary duty. Hannah, you jumped ahead without. It's all part of their fiduciary duty to make sure that the organization is functioning properly. And by doing all of those things, then supporting that fundraising and outreach is that much easier because you have the transparency in place and everything else. Now we can go to the next slide. So DEI, this is not necessarily what you're thinking about when DEI comes to mind when we're talking about diverse perspectives. This isn't, nonprofits are, in my experience, boards and management are, women are heavily represented in there. So are minorities. So that's not really what we're looking at for diverse perspective when we're talking about a board. It's more along the lines of what kind of different knowledge can you bring to your board that would strengthen your board? Can you find an attorney that would be able to help with some legal understanding when the board is coming up to questions that involve legal things? Can you find an accountant to sit on your board? Now, these people are not going to be able to provide services to the organization because of conflict of interest. But they're going to be helpful in the board making decisions. And you can also bring people as advisors, right? So advisory board members would not have a vote, but they can add perspective to the board. So you can have advisory boards. Um, for instance, you could have an audit committee that would have an advisor, a CPA advisor on the board that would not be paid, would not have a voting responsibility, but simply provides advice. And then inclusive decision making, involve all of these people in your decision making, and that strengthens the credibility with all of the stakeholders. That be employees, clients, and board members. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that you can have all the disagreement that you want within your board, but when you're done discussing it, you need to come out with a unified decision, and everybody needs to be on board. And that's how you want to, come up with the DEI solution. Okay. Policies that you should have in place or can have in place. The first three of these, conflict of interest, whistleblower, and document retention and restrictions, they're actually questions on your 990 that you have to answer either yes or no. And absolutely grantors are going to be looking at how you answer these questions on your 990. As Hannah mentioned, as Carlos mentioned, grantors generally the first thing they do is they look at your 990. It's publicly available on various websites, including the IRS. And so, answering these questions in the affirmative makes your organization look better to a grantor and to the public, right? And conflict of interest, primarily this is about financial interest, right? If I'm sitting on your board and I'm an accountant, generally you would not hire me to do accounting work for you. There can be um, exceptions to that, but they have to be documented, and there has to be a good reason for it. Whistleblowers, this is to protect your employees and your clients from retaliation, and document retention and destruction, particularly if you're dealing with people, right? You are potentially going to have a lot of personally identifiable information in your records, and you want to make sure that that's being handled correctly, both on the retention side and ultimately at the destruction side. And then finally, a code of ethics is something that you can adopt. It certainly helps. And this can encompass client, both the employees and the board members and management can have parts of this code of ethics to make sure that the organization is respected and does what you want it to do. So in practice, there should be transparency in financial reporting. That's absolutely vital. I mean, you already have the 990, but there's more information than that. So one of the other things where, transparency is really important, again, is in executive compensation. You want to make sure that your executive compensation package is commensurate with the ability of the executive director, with other organizations of the size, and is reasonably figured. Program results sharing openly, already got that on the 990. You can put it on your website. Again, this is just things that attract more and better grantors and clients by showing what it is that you're doing. And there should be a clear separation of duties between the board and the management, right? The board is responsible for setting guidelines and making sure that everything is happening the way it's supposed to, and the management should manage the organization and the day-to-day activities. Common pitfalls, board disengagement, right? I see this, or I've seen this many times over the years, where the board just shows up. They don't really do anything. They are essentially a rubber stamp for the executive director, and they're a board in name only. This is not something that you want. You want the board to be engaged, and if you start seeing that they're not engaged, maybe it's time to bring in some new blood and change up some board members. And along with that comes, lack of policy enforcement. It's like you have policies like conflict of interest for a reason, and you want to make sure that those policies are being followed. And then insufficient documentation. I mean, this is always an issue for any type of organization, not just nonprofits. But particularly when you're dealing with grantor agencies and public funds, you want to absolutely be certain that you can document everything. Why did you spend the money? How did you come up with your budgets? And what happened with the money once you had it? All right, moving forward, we have a government self-assessment tool that we've sent out to you and we'll send out to you again. Ongoing board education is and can be very important, and Hannah certainly is well capable of handling that. Kendra does as well. You haven't met Kendra yet if she's not doing your audit, but even our auditors are happy to assist to the extent that they can without creating some sort of a conflict on our part. Annual policy reviews is something that every board should do. And all of those things together will, automatically strengthen the culture of accountability within your organization, and that's what you want to strive for. So, it's not just about compliance, right? You've joined, as a board or as a management member of management of this organization. You believe in its mission. And the way to protect that mission is to make sure that you're doing all the things that are necessary, both for the board to fulfill its fiduciary duty and for the management to operate the organization in a way that will make sure that that mission continues. So, what's one step that you can take this year, right? What is it? There's some policies that you should be that you should be adopting this year. Can you do a better job of budgeting in the future? Should you do a board retreat? Is there something that is there a new strategic plan? Are you looking to expand your mission? Are you looking to focus more on a particular area? Think about that and see if you can come up with something that you want to do this year. So the tools that we've sent out to you, include a conflict of interest policy and a whistleblower policy, as well as that government's assessment tool. We're available to help with those if you have any questions. And so make sure you take advantage of what we've given you. All right. Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Pete. That was very good. Very interesting to think about. As a reminder, you can put questions in the Q&A box at any time. I was actually wondering, Pete, if we could go back to the slide before, and I don't know if you wanted to talk at all about any of these tools or policies just a little bit more, or if Hannah wanted to, but I think these are going to be really great tools. I know people receive these in their email ahead of time. But could somebody maybe just say a few more words about how the different organizations can use these tools?
Yeah. So, I mean, the government's assessment tool is, just that. I mean, it's just to assess what is your governance structure, and give you ideas of maybe things that you can do to strengthen board governance. So that's just a first step kind of tool. Whereas the conflict of interest and whistleblower policies, I mean, these are things that have the kind of the minimum requirements. You can always add to them, you can modify them, but you should have them in place, and everyone should be should be familiar with them, right? Every year, I mean, it's a good practice to have every one of your board members complete a conflict of interest questionnaire. Um, some grants require them, some government grants require them. So, basically it says, I am a board member of this organization, and I have looked at, my financial dealings and my family's financial dealings, and I am not, in any kind of conflict of interest situation with this organization. And or it can say, hey, I do have potentially a conflict of interest and I'm disclosing it. And as I stated when I was talking about that, there are exceptions, right? If the organization needs an architect, and there happens to be an architect on the board, and they go through a proper bid competition, and the board architect is able to provide a better product at a lower price to the organization than the architects that were provided bids, then it absolutely makes sense to use that architect, right? Now, that architect should not be involved in the vote of the board. It should not be involved in the discussion of the board to come up with that, and it should be well documented. But the reason the policy exists is to also allow you to properly come up with reasons for the exemptions and to document them properly. And then the whistleblower policy, we want to make sure that nobody is afraid to speak out in the organization, and that's employees, management, board members, and clients.
That's great. Thank you, Pete. We've got a few more questions. Any suggestions for getting the board to be more engaged? I have been with the organization for 18 months and have never been asked a question regarding the financials I submit during board meetings.
So my recommendation for getting the board engaged is there's a couple of things you can do. One, you can do a board training. So you could have somebody come in and train on a couple of different topics, specifically how to read financials at a very basic level. I think one reason we see boards not always ask questions is they don't feel confident in the ability to ask the right questions. So doing a training can be very beneficial. So we do board retreats where we structure them to go over things like financials for beginners, and we talk about board member responsibilities. Another option is you could do a small, and I say small because the last thing you want to do is overwhelm the board and ask for too much. So start small, a 2 to 3 hour strategic session. So having a strategic session where you have a couple objectives, a couple things you want to focus on can really increase the engagement of the board as they're able to participate in these conversations and move beyond some of the things that are talked about in a board meeting and actually get a chance to dive into some things that the meeting might not give space for. That can be really beneficial. So those would be kind of my two recommendations, is either doing a retreat or a training or involving them in a strategic discussion. And again, I say start small, and then you can always ramp up if it's something that you had a good response from and the board is wanting to commit to.
Right. Another option would be to provide some sort of a summary of the financial statements. If you're talking about financial statements in particular, that because they are or can be overwhelming to board members who are not accountants and financial people. So, if you provide a short synopsis such as here's what our cash balance is, and this is what our expected cash balance is. This is how how much we've taken in grant funds, and this was our budget. And these are our general expenditure categories and their budget and progress. And that will generally speaking, if you do that, you can provide that in a couple of minutes. And that will actually trigger the board to look closer at the financial statements themselves, right? If they hear, well, we've spent $100,000, over 3 months, and our budget was to only spend $80,000. Well, if they're looking at a full financial statement, they may not see that. It may not be readily apparent, but if you say that to them, then it's like, okay, so what is it that caused that, right? And so that then gives you the opportunity to get them more engaged in the financial piece. And the other thing would be, if you're exceeding your budget or if you're well under budget on a particular item, go to the board and say, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to underspend this grant potentially, which means we're not going to earn the grant in some cases, right? So what is it that we should be doing in order to make sure that we earn all of the grant funds and impact our mission in the best way?
Great answers. It sounds like highlighting the different parts of the budget really is helpful to get them more engaged as well. And then, of course, training board members is always very useful and I think could probably help a variety of things. Another question, can you talk about the board making inclusive decisions? Does this reflect events an organization attends or hosts?
When I say inclusive decisions, that just means that involving everyone that you have, and involving all of the expertise that you can bring to the board. And that's where kind of the advisory positions and boards can be helpful, right? So if you're making a decision about what should our workplace look like, involve staff members, not just management, right? It's like if you're getting all of the perspective of what is going on internally in the organization from the executive director, you're absolutely receiving a biased view, no matter who the executive director is and no matter how great they are. And so being inclusive just means taking all of those different views and making them part of your decision-making process.
Hmm. Thank you. That's very helpful. I have a couple more questions. How do I know, this is kind of going back to Carlos's presentation, how do I know what type of 990 I need to file and how do I get this info to my tax preparer or all of the information you need to your tax preparer?
So again, the number one factor on what return you'll be filing is either support or total assets. Barring the fact that you're not a private foundation. But there are checklists that we go through, the same checklists that are provided on the IRS website, that go through the number of factors of, and most of this is to get between 990N and everything else. Because since 990N is such a small filing requirement, there's a lot of stipulations to file that return. So there's most of the barriers to entry are on that form. But then between 990EZ and 990, it's really just supporting total assets. And then when it comes to getting this information to your tax preparer, it depends on what they use. A couple of years back, we just used to request it through an email. We would send out an email after year end asking for all the various items, typically going off last year's items. Plus, if we had any conversations during the year, we would update it for those items if it sparked more requirements or more disclosure. Well, what our firm does is we use a cloud website called Uplink. It allows us to request things and allows you to add things to it. It's the same thing Kendra's audit team uses. And then we use that on top of what the Tennessee team uses, on top of what Chad and Cole use. But that's typically how we get it. It's either through an email request or through some sort of encrypted website service that allows you to upload things.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos. You talked about audits a little bit earlier. I know this webinar is focused on 990s, but do you have any advice for audits? Even though we're not required to do them, is it still useful to do an audit?
I would say no. If you're not required to have an audit, the only reason that you would do so is if the board believes that there is some sort of financial malfeasance. But that's not really what an audit is designed to do. An audit is really designed to make sure that your financial statements are accurate, particularly that your balance sheet is accurate, and properly categorized. And if you look at an audit engagement letter, the first thing it says is this is not designed to find fraud or any kind of problems, because if the money's gone, the money's gone, right? When you're looking at your balance sheet and it says, you have $50,000 in cash at the end of the year, whether $25,000 was stolen or whether it was used for, proper items on your financial statement, it's gone, right? So the ending balance is $50,000, and so that's not the idea of an audit. So I would never say to a board, have an audit just to have assurance of your financial statements, right? If you have problems trusting your financial statements that you receive internally, there are other things that you want to do. I mean, one of the things is, if you have that trust issue, then maybe your management is not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
That
But
was very, oh, sorry, Pete.
yeah, but
Go
but
ahead.
the cost of an audit is almost prohibitive. I mean, basically a financial statement audit starts at about $10,000 to $12,000, and so that's a lot of money that you could be doing good things with.
Mm.
Well, and remember, there's a lot of things you can do on the internal control side. So there's a lot of things you can do looking at internal controls to come up with some safeguards that can be really, really crucial and important when it comes to, making sure that there isn't issues going on. So utilize your internal controls.
Right.
That is a relief to hear. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I hope that you enjoyed this webinar. We will be sending out a survey later that we would love to have you fill out so that we can figure out what you liked and anything that we could do to improve. Stay tuned. We are going to have our next webinar in January, on January 20th, and one of the survey questions will be which of the webinars you might be interested in. So please come to our next webinar, invite your friends, and let us know what you would like to learn more about. Thank you again to our speakers today. This was so informative, and I hope you all take away useful information for your organizations. Thank you so much, everybody.